Hello, my name is Saurabh Sanghvi, and I'm a second-year student at MIT Sloan, and I'm the student lead for the Competitive Advantage Series. It's my privilege to announce Dr. Charles Czeisler from Harvard Medical School and Kevin Arnovitz from ESPN. Their talk is called Sleeping Giants Are Zzzz, the NBA's next big performance metric. The talk will go for 25 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Doc Rivers tells this story that when he was with the 2010-2011 Celtics, just coming off a finals appearance, that they were looking at the schedule, and they had this new sleep doctor, and they were scheduled for a back-to-back in January. Portland on a Thursday night, Phoenix on a Friday night. Phoenix had lost Amari. There'd been turnover. They weren't expected to be any good. And this sleep doctor looked at the schedule and said, "You're going to lose that game, or it's very likely that you're going to lose that game." And Doc's like, they're not all that good. We're coming off a finals appearance. Sounds presumptuous. Fast forward 3 months later, Doc's getting tossed out of the game in the second quarter in Phoenix, down 20. Gets back to the locker room, and there's a text waiting for him, a very polite version of "I told you so." I wanted to know more about the person who was on the other end of that text, and Doc sent me to Dr. Charles Czeisler, who's this gentleman sitting right up here. And Dr. Czeisler has consulted several NBA teams, Major League Baseball teams, and wanted to, sort of just get started. Like, how do you get hooked up with an NBA team, and how do you start, essentially, through your recommendations, governing shoot-around schedules and practice schedules and changing the way teams fly, all things that we'll talk about in specific, but how did you first come to it?
Well, one of my medical school classmates, Dr. Don Roberts from the Trailblazers, he actually said, "Hey, I know this." After the Trailblazers had lost a whole series of games during an East Coast road trip, he suggested to the athletic trainer, maybe you should call this classmate of mine. He does a lot of work on sleep and circadian rhythms, and maybe he might help us make the adjustment. So I got a call from the athletic trainer, Jay Jensen, and so I asked him what he did, in preparation for these trips, and I was kind of shocked to learn that the players, they finish the game. By the time they get out of the clubhouse, the arena, maybe it's midnight. I learned that NBA players can't eat dinner before a game, obviously, because they're going to be playing at a very intense level. So they have dinner afterwards. By the time they might go out to a club, by the time then it's 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I said, "When do you fly?" And he said, "Well, we usually get to the airport by 7 a.m. to go out on the East Coast." When do they pack? They pack after they get home. And I was like, "Well, when do they sleep?" "They sleep on the plane." "Why do you take an early flight?" And I thought, maybe it's cheaper. They get a cheaper airfare. And he was kind of insulted. He said, "We have Blazer One. We have our own plane." So I said, "You have your own plane and you choose to take, an early morning flight? Why would you do that when you get?" And then I learned that that's the way they had done it. The coach had done it for 15, 20 years as a player, and then he had done it for 15 or 20 years as a coach. And he said, that's the way we tough out jet lag. So the method was simply to become as sleep deprived as you can, so that by the time you get there, you're going to be able to sleep in the new time zone. And I said, well, there is a better way of doing that. Turns out that it's hard to buck tradition. So the first thing I was told was, you can change anything, but you can't change when the flight leaves. To which I responded to the coach, "Why are you calling me?" And so the conversation began, the negotiation began, and as Ed Lessard here at the Celtics likes to say, we have to take baby steps at each point along the way. And so the first thing that we changed out there was to finally I got them to agree for one trip to make it an afternoon flight so that they could actually sleep. And the first report I got back was that the plane ran out of food because the players were so awake and alert on the flight that they ate the cabin out of house and home. Then I said, well, you should stay on Blazer time because there's no need for you to switch to East Coast time because the games are at 7:30 in the evening, so that'll be 4:30 in the. And they were like, what? So when they came out here, they were actually instead of a curfew at midnight, the curfew was at like 3 o'clock in the morning. They were very happy about
When they got
that.
to Orlando, and you said, "Why don't you practice at 10 p.m.?" And
That's right.
this
I
was
said,
a revelation.
So they sort of walked into the practice arena, and everybody's freaking out in Orlando. Why are they coming to practice at 10:30 at night? And I said, well, that's when you normally play your games in Portland. So they were like, oh, okay, but it's 10:30. But so they practiced then, and they won all their East Coast trips on that particular, except, thankfully, against the Celtics.
So
Otherwise, my son would have been very upset.
now you end up in Boston, and I told the Doc story, and Doc swears by your stuff. I mean, that was the really, the interesting thing is, whatever impression you made. I mean, I first got turned on this story because the beat writers in LA right now are just really pissed at Doc because practices are far later than they're used to, and the media availabilities are back, and they couldn't understand it. And he's like, look, I mean, we're not going to practice at 9 or 10 a.m. the way this team normally has. So, you got hooked up with Ed, but then you get down to Rhode Island for Celtics training camp in, summer of 2010.
That's right. And so we presented the training camp, and I said to Ed Lasert, do you mind if I bring my son out there? He was, I think, 12 at the time. And so we went out there, and I talked. Doc Rivers. I had given Doc like an hour and a half sort of deep background on the whole area. And he said, okay, with the players, it's just going to be about 10 minutes. Just a briefing. We've given them all sorts of coaching all day long. This is an evening session. We're asking them if they want to come. And he said, you got to make it brief. So it was 10 minutes. And at the end of the 10 minutes, there were like 2 hours worth of questions. And he was shocked. I was shocked. They all stayed. And we're asking very specific information about specific trips, this, that. They really, because Doc said, if the players are not going to buy into it, we're not going to do it. But they were, I think, really excited. They were excited about the notion of having because again, the practice schedule, to have practices at 9 in the morning, and Ed said that for players that are injured or need treatments beforehand, they have to get there 1 to 2 hours beforehand. So that would mean that they would again be getting there at 7 o'clock in the morning. But I never forget after this 2 hours, and then we're getting questions from the top players, and afterwards, as we were leaving, KG was walking around outside, and he came up to the car and said hello to my son and to me, and thanked us and whatnot. And as we're driving away, my 12-year-old son said, Dad, I didn't realize you did anything important. Right, Mark? He didn't say that.
We're talking about, we're talking about travel schedules. We're talking about, getting teams to change practice times. And what's interesting is, I don't know that sleep's ever been addressed at this conference, but the themes you're touching on, culture, you have to sell it to the players, you have to sell it to the coaches. And one of the things I found is that, having talked to Ray Allen in the last couple of weeks, or guys around the league like Jared Dudley, who sort of, have sort of done research on this, even Blake Griffin, that it's once they hear the information, this isn't all that tough of a sell. I mean, you have a couple guys who, will stay up playing Xbox, but the guys who've taken to it are born again. I mean, they completely, buy into the whole philosophy.
Yeah, it really is amazing because people don't realize the impact that sleep deficiency has on their health and on their performance until they begin to experience it. And these players, the reason why the Celtics ask 2 hours worth of questions is because they live it every day. And one of the things that I think impressed Doc Rivers, that you can see illustrated on the previous slide, is the reaction time. The slide is, I hope it's a little better over there. No, not quite. Anyway, the curve that is one down from the top one is the average reaction time. And if you could see the axes, you'd see that the average reaction time during the daytime, when, for example, now, for the average person, should be about 1/4 of a second. But if you have missed a night of sleep, the average reaction time jumps to about 750 to 900 milliseconds instead of 250 milliseconds. Now, if all you're going to be doing is picking up a pencil and doing something with it, it's not going to be such a big deal. But if you're an elite athlete, an extra half a second in your reaction time could be the difference between making a play and missing it.
Because in our vocabulary, half the league runs a read and react offense. Help defense is essentially the backbone. I mean, you're talking about help decisions. We hear it on every broadcast, and you hear it in every media availability. And this is the kind of stuff we're talking about, right?
Right, and it also affects the risk of injury. So if you imagine, first of all, your reaction time being degraded, and then this is some old data about missed signals in your visual field. So imagine how important it is to be able to see everything on the court. And now we have individuals who are in the blue who have slept the night before, and individuals who've been on a red eye, for example, and not slept the night before because of back-to-back games. And now you see that they have 10 times as many missed signals, which are illustrated in red, in the visual field. So now you're an elite athlete, you've got to see everything that's going on, and you're just going to have a greater chance of having a lapse of attention.
Yeah, I want to talk, and it's not just lapse of attention. We're talking about in a season that's been dominated by injuries. I'm going to put this stuff up just because it's just amazing to me. And the next slide does the same thing. It's not basketball, but it does speak to travel. But I mean, we're talking about issues of inflammation. You're talking about a lack of sleep or less sleep retards testosterone.
Yeah, I mean, that always gets the players' attention when I tell them that, if you spend a week and you get only 4 hours of sleep a night, and you're a young, healthy guy, your testosterone levels drop by the equivalent of 11 years of aging after just 1 week.
So we're talking about a 25-year-old now playing at a 36-year-old's level, a 35, which might explain why, I mean, again, we don't have this data for basketball, but could explain why a team going from, west to east is basically a, 63-37 dog.
Right.
Okay.
And so now it has an impact on risk of injury, on inflammation, because sleep deficiency increases the body's inflammatory response. It increases the risk of infection and illness, and it also lengthens recovery time if you do get injured.
Just for clarity's sake, no travel means not that the team isn't traveling, but that they're going in the same time zone.
Right.
So
this is the likelihood of a home team winning. This is work of my colleague Bill Schwartz, who's out at UMass Worcester. The winning percentage of the home team depends on the direction of the visitors' transcontinental travel. And if you show the next slide, you'll see that it makes a difference of 1.24 more runs per game when the visitor had just completed eastward travel. And this is the performance of the home team against that visitor.
the research is so inchoate. I mean, we're still so early, and one thing that dawned on me is there are only, let's say, 15 guys, and really, 8 or 9 who might play regularly on the NBA. We could go to a factory right now, and you could get neurological and sleep data over a course of time, over 1,000, maybe 2,000 people. How can I say for certain that this is about 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3 wins a season for a West Coast team or an East Coast team or any team for that matter? I mean, how, when can we conclusively say, hey, team executive, this is really a difference between a 3 seed and a 6 seed? I mean, how do we get there?
That's a question that we're asked in every occupation. So if we work with airline pilots, if we work with firefighters, if we work with police officers, we've studied 5,000 policemen and whatnot, 7,000 firefighters, and in each instance, people say, well, maybe it affects surgeons, but is it going to affect internists? Maybe it affects airline pilots, but how do we know that it affects basketball players? These are properties of how, this is the physiology of how we're made. And so we know that certain types of work, particularly when they involve reaction time and training, because we know that training is adversely affected. Our ability to learn is degraded if we haven't gotten enough
That was
sleep.
the thing that was actually most interesting. I just have always been under the kind of layman's assumption that, you get a good night's sleep before a big day because you want to be well rested. And what I learned from
And that's true.
is that, no, actually, it's just as important to get a good night's sleep after
Yeah, both are important because it's after we learn something. So we have to have had enough sleep the day before, or the night before, in order to be able to pay attention and focus and bring in the information. But then it is the sleep after you've learned something where you consolidate the information into your memory. And beautiful experiments have been done at MIT, as a matter of fact, where scientists have trained animals in a maze, to get a slice of cheese at the end of the, and they can track with electrodes in the brain, what are called hippocampal place cells. So there's an area of the brain where these memories are stored and where you can see where the animal is in the maze. What are they doing during sleep? They're running through the maze over and over and over again, hundreds, if not thousands of times, and then they can do it a lot faster the next day because they've consolidated that memory during sleep. If you don't sleep, you don't get that consolidation.
So if I'm learning the pick and roll coverages, if I'm learning, the new corner sets we're putting in, I mean, anything that is essentially reviewed schematically, on video, the film room. If I go and then I'm out till 2 a.m. and the flight leaves at 7 and I'm only getting 3.5, 4 hours, my retention is going to be far less than if I'm a player and essentially I'm getting my 7.5 hours.
Yeah, and it's not just your retention, but your integration of that information with all of your previous memory. So our associative thinking, our ability to solve problems. So let's say we've played an important game. It's the first game of a series. And maybe we lost the game. But a good team will learn something from that loss so that they can learn about how the other team is playing and be able to integrate with their play and make some new moves so that they win the next game and win the series. But the ability to do that is going to be greatly degraded if you don't get an adequate amount of sleep after that game.
All right, I want to talk about one of my pet issues, which is the road back-to-back. In terms of deleterious effect on world-class athletic performance, in terms of risk of injury, I mean, what are we doing to these guys by having them play at Portland, at Phoenix?
Personally, I'm very much hoping that the new NBA commissioner eliminates back-to-back road games. It's a disservice to the fans to have one of the teams so degraded because there's no way structurally that we can ensure that the players get enough sleep if they're on a trip like that, trip from Portland to Phoenix. I mean, if you've got a 5 or 6 hour flight, in that particular instance, the plane broke down, and so they were actually delayed even further. And by the way, I don't think I said I told you so, but.
That's the way Doc is. Doc's a bit of an embellisher.
Yeah, he might have
we have found.
That.
Yeah.
I would not have done that, even though I may have thought it. Yeah, there's just no way structurally, if you're going to keep the players up all night, that they can function as well the next day. And one of the things that it affects is the emotional brain. So it's not an accident that Doc got a technical and was thrown out of the game, because when you don't get enough sleep, actually fMRI studies have been done to show that if you're shown disturbing images, for example, the amygdala, which is the emotional area of the brain, has 10 times the firing when you've been up all night and shown those disturbing images in the scanner than if you've got an adequate amount of sleep. And moreover, the prefrontal cortex area of the brain, which is the one that controls judgment, is more disconnected from the emotional brain. So what I like to explain to the players is, if the referee does something that you don't like and calls something you don't like, you're much more likely to get a technical and be thrown out of the game if you haven't gotten enough sleep, because you're just not going to be able to cope with that injustice.
I think we're about time for questions, and let's open up the floor. I'm sure there are many. Who we got? Oh, maybe there.
Very interesting talk. Have you had interest from sports like soccer and rugby with regard to the sleep data?
I personally have not been, I've had interest from hockey and from baseball, and but I haven't heard from rugby or soccer. Maybe there are others working on
What's your view on naps? I mean, a lot of players will nap in the afternoon on a back-to-back, things like that.
As the teams that I've worked with will tell you, I'm a big proponent of naps. We are in a sleep-deficient society where people are burning the candle at both ends. There are some circumstances with patients with insomnia where naps can lower the sleep drive and make it more difficult to sleep at night. I don't think that that's the case with the average NBA player. Most of them are not getting enough sleep. And so the ability to recharge and get that sleep that they need in the afternoon before a game, I think really can provide a fantastic boost. And many of the most accomplished players like LeBron James and others will actually rent a hotel room so that they can take a nap before a game.
You just mentioned baseball as one of the sports that has approached you. Do you think that there's an even bigger difference between when there's lack of sleep in baseball, especially for hitters, seeing as they're facing pitches in the mid-90s and reaction speed is obviously paramount?
Yeah, reaction time is a huge issue in baseball, and they play 182 or something like that games, which is quite a grueling schedule and can be very exhausting. And they also have many of the baseball players arrive at the park early in the morning and are there the entire day as well as playing in the evening. And so naps in that context, I think, are very important, but it's difficult because unless there are facilities for that in the park, where they can't exactly, leave the park with all the fans around and go to a hotel room and nap. So that's a particular challenge in baseball.
Are you of the belief that the historic futility of the Chicago Cubs resides in their inability to get sleep?
Well, having grown up in Chicago, I have no comment.
How broad and how well defined is the science as far as restorative sleep, and how well we know that our hours spent sleeping are good hours spent sleeping or bad? Like, because if we can get efficient as far as our sleep, we can get more with less.
I don't know of any research. I mean, there have been many attempts, and a colleague of mine has done studies trying to split sleep into the nocturnal sleep and a nap sleep and see if there's some way of optimizing the amount. Unfortunately, to perform at your best, it seems for the average person, and there are inter-individual differences, but for the average person, it's about 8.2 or 8.3 hours of sleep per 24 hours in some combination. If it gets broken up into more than 2 bouts, it is generally less efficient.
Are they getting better with like some of these prescription things? I know old-time sleep pills were not judged as effective as far as getting you restorative sleep. Are they getting closer to figuring out a way to literally shut you down for 8 hours effectively?
There is a new generation of hypnotic medications that's being developed, which I hope will be better than the benzodiazepines. But I still don't think that there's any evidence that it rivals sleep without medication, which is in general better. There are major advances in understanding what sleep does and what happens during sleep. And one of the new exciting findings from this past October is that some of the support cells in the brain actually shrink in size so that we can clear debris from the brain more rapidly, about 20 times more rapidly. And one of the principal things that is being cleared is beta amyloid, which is what builds up in Alzheimer's disease and is toxic to neurons. So the recognition of why sleep is important is becoming clearer and clearer. Yes.
So you mentioned that a 25-year-old who misses a week of sleep has a testosterone level of a 36-year-old. Is that reversible? Like
Great question. Great question. Yeah. No, you're forever older. No, I'm just kidding. So we don't know. A week is reversible, but we don't know at what point it becomes irreversible when it is chronic.
We're already seeing some NBA teams manipulating their roster, such as resting players on the second day of a back-to-back. Do we ever think that they might get more creative, such as sending 3 reserve players ahead a day early to an East Coast team to be extra rested?
That's a great question. I have not seen any teams do that. Usually the teams travel together. But it is certainly something that, that I think, with the next generation of applications.
We always heard kind of in the playoffs they would set a starter for baseball. Like you send that guy ahead for a night, and I mean presumably, for rest.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, to the best of my knowledge, none of the teams that I've worked with have done that, but that's certainly a great idea. Yes.
Effects of aging on sleep?
So as we get older, our ability to consolidate sleep degrades. Our sleep is not as deep, and we have more awakenings during the night, and it becomes a little harder to get back to sleep. But the difference on average in the total duration of sleep in someone who doesn't have a sleep disorder only changes by about 20 or 30 minutes. But many people, the prevalence of sleep disorders becomes much greater as we get older. And that's one of the things we didn't talk about, but which is also very important, is screening for sleep disorders among the players. Because one of the things that, one of the most common sleep disorders is sleep-disordered breathing or sleep apnea. And you might think that fit athletes would not be at risk for sleep apnea, but actually, and here's Shaquille O'Neal, and if you want to go to our website, understandingsleep.org, you'll see a great video of Shaq explaining sleep apnea and what his diagnosis and treatment and so on. But what happens is if you have a lot of muscle, whatever is in the neck that crowds out the airway, and it can be if somebody's obese, but muscle can also crowd out the airway. So if someone is extremely fit, but they're very muscular, they can also be at increased risk for obstructive sleep apnea. And if you can't breathe when you sleep, then you're not going to be able to get that restorative sleep that you need.
Let's thank our speakers. And Dr. Czeisler has said if anybody has remaining questions, please approach him outside.
Thanks.